The English stumble through life with their stiff upper lips trembling over cold tea. Australians, meanwhile, swagger about in a sunburnt paradise, wrestling crocodiles before breakfast. Americans barrel in next, driving giant pickup trucks, AR-15s in hand. And the French, they wear necklaces made out of onions and little berets on their heads, while drinking wine, each a caricature, each a stereotype. Yet stereotypes are the ingredients of national identity, the unpolished components of belonging. And yet, the World Economic Forum appears to be intent on consigning this cultural tapestry to the flames, made extinct, replaced by a featureless plane of compliance, where the only desired identity is a mindless automaton, devoid of individuality. The World Economic Forum, that assembly of the self-appointed rulers, has long styled itself as the architect of our collective tomorrow. They see the English as muddied, provincial, opinionated, and with quirks that do not fit into their narrative. They view English individuality not as something to cherish, but as a flaw that needs to be corrected. Our national identity, in their calculus, is not the origin of who we are, but a hindrance to their seamless utopia. Why else would they pursue with such tenacious zeal the dissolution of our cultural identity that has defined us since we first scratched our names into the dirt? They seem to crave that our culture be wiped out, our distinctions erased until we conform to their creed, a creed that reeks of dominance and control cloaked as enlightenment. Look no further than the flood tide of migration they have unleashed upon England, a deluge that washes away the familiar shores of nationhood with a force which is both relentless and calculated. England's borders have become nothing more than suggestions, a frontier reduced to a mere footnote in a politician's database. The spectacle is particularly stark. Boatloads of migrants sail across the channel and are greeted not with scrutiny, but with open arms. They are ushered into luxury hotels with crisp sheets and complimentary soap, while the Treasury's coffers disgorge cash and mobile phones into their hands. Meanwhile, the English, those sons and daughters of this damp and doubtful isle, trudge on through a landscape of rising rents and shrinking wages, their struggles rendered invisible by a government that seems to have mislaid its compass. The contrast is grotesque. English families scrape by on memories of better days, while a stone's throw away, new arrivals feast on 4-course meals in 4-star comfort, courtesy of a taxpayer who never signed up for the bill. This is no accident, it's a strategy, and the fingerprints of the World Economic Forum are all over it. Their vision, articulated in glossy reports and parroted in Westminster's corridors of power, hinges on the idea that our national identity is a beast to be tamed, and if it can't be tamed, then it is to be taken out back and put down like a dog foaming at the mouth. The World Economic Forum and their puppets in Parliament are desperate to break the English spirit. And what better way to break our spirit than to dilute it, to flood the towns with newcomers who owe no allegiance to the soil they tread and no respect for this nation. The World Economic Forum does not merely tolerate this migration, it champions it, seeing in every boat a battering ram against the walls of cultural individuality. A nation preoccupied with integrating the unfamiliar, with promoting the needs of strangers over its own, is a nation less likely to cling to its old songs, its old fights, its old self, its old identity. Compliance creeps in where cohesion frays, and obedience follows when a people no longer know who they are. So why this obsession with uprooting the roots of identity, the dialects, the flags, the quiet prides that anchor us to our country? Power, as ever, is the answer. They want to seize power, and a man has power when he embraces his identity. Because people tethered to their own tail, their own turf, their own beliefs, their own self, are less likely to take the knee before a gospel that was written by a group of megalomaniac billionaires with a god complex. The WEF's paradise is a world of those who do not question their authority, and what better way to get to that point than to swamp the West with migrants, to strain the seams of nations until they burst, leaving behind a populace too weary, too weak, too dejected to resist the technocrats' dominance. Our cultural identities are not mere ornaments. They are the forge of meaning. Without them, we drift into a purgatory of glass towers and digital screens, reciting the same sanctioned lines, the same agreed narrative, in the same flattened voices. Yet the WEF marches on, unmoved by the richness it aims to scour away. Theirs is a doctrine of efficiency, of a world where dissent is ironed out, and diversity shrink-wrapped into a conference slogan. They believe that by flooding nations with the uprooted, by housing boat migrants in luxury, while the English queue for crumbs, they can forge a new humanity, one that nods meekly at their edicts, one that no longer murmurs of sovereignty or heritage. It is a vision as cold as it is bold, a planet of blank canvases, primed for the elite. What they miss, or willfully ignore, is that identity is not a shackle to be broken, but a thread to be woven. Do not mistake these tyrants for pantomime villains, twirling capes in a layer of snow. The World Economic Forum's denizens are, in their own eyes, the virtuous, earnest, sated, persuaded of their nobility. But virtue, when it wields a sledgehammer, can wound deeper than wickedness ever dared. To dismantle national identity, through migration, through policy, through the silent alchemy of neglect, is to dismantle the human heart, to swap the kaleidoscope of our differences for a monochrome submission that profits only the few. The Union Jack swaying in the rain, the French squabbling over cheese, the Australians bronzed and bold, these are not impediments to a finer world. They are the world, in all its ragged, radiant splendour. The WEF may not see it, but we must. For if we let them drown us in their flood, we will wake one day to find ourselves forever lost, not just to each other, but to the very thing we once called our home.